Now, action potentials. Refractory periods. Refractory periods means I can't do nothing. Refractory period means that no amount of stimulation is going to make anything happen. Refractory means this: oh, I'm full. It's like Monty Python movies. Oh, give me a book, I think I'm going to puke. Oh no, monsieur, would you like one thin mint? Oh no, I couldn't take another bite. Oh, how about one waffle thin mint to eat? Oh, one more thin mint. Boom! He explodes. You see, that's refractory period. Refractory period is, I couldn't get another bite, I'm going to puke. That means you can't have any more. Refractory period, okay? Refractory period is like this, okay? The first 3 times the boyfriend sends roses, it excites you and stimulates an action potential, okay? Then he sends you 5 dozen roses a day, every day. And after a while, it's like this. You could send me 40 dozen and you're not going to get any action out of me, okay? Do something different for me. Okay? It's the same thing as sending roses. The same thing as perfume, right? Perfume. You put on that perfume, little issey miyake, I smell it, it's driving me. And then after a while, you know what? The olfactory lobes don't sense it anymore. You're refractory. And you could pour on that perfume by the gallon, by the ladle, by the 55-gallon drum. It's not going to stimulate you. It's like getting used to a smell. Once you're used to a smell, like your own, for instance, do you have a smell? Of course I don't. No, you have a smell. You're just used to it. You are refractory to your own smell. It doesn't drive you. It doesn't get you in any action. Your own smell. Because you're used to it. So that's the concept of refractory period. It means no stimulation can make it happen. Absolute refractory period. I wish that they had said this part to me in medical school. You see, the absolute refractory period, let's look at the technical definition. No matter how strong the stimulus, it cannot induce a second action potential. It means nothing that happens, you're not going to get any action no matter what happens, okay? It's like being, you see, I used to think it was like being post-coital. But that's not what actually refractory period is. So that was the mistake. Like that it's been done, it's had its action potential, the channels are open, it's releasing, and then you're over and you're sitting there resting. That's not absolute refractory period. That's relative refractory period. Absolute refractory period is different. Absolute refractory period is your intracoital. So the thing is that that's absolute refractory period. Absolute refractory period does not mean the action potential is over and done and it's sitting around resting. Absolute refractory period is not the school year is over. Hey Dad, it's vacation. I want to hang out and play this and play that, and I want to do absolute refractory period is not, hey, school is over, give me a break, I want to rest, I want to sleep. That's not absolute refractory period. Absolute refractory period is, hey, Austin, you should go to school. Absolute refractory is this. He goes, Dad, I'm in school. No, but I want you to go to class. No, Dad, I'm actually in a class right now. I can't go to class if I'm in one. So no amount of classes you bring by, or teachers, or books, is going to get me to be stimulated because I'm in a classroom right now. You notice? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Boring person in the front of the room, books, classes. You know what I mean? Other kids with bad attitudes. You know what I mean? Don't you notice them? That's absolute refractory period. Absolute refractory period does not mean you did something, it's done, it's over, and you're resting. Absolute refractory period means that the thing is occurring at that moment. Absolute refractory period means you are depolarizing now. That's why it's absolutely refractory, because you're depolarizing. How can another stimulus make you depolarize when you're depolarizing? Okay. Due to voltage and activation of sodium channels, refractory period means that the membrane potential, which is at about -70 inside, you're depolarizing up into your +50, +70, and you're up here already depolarized. You're living up there in depolarization land, and no other stimulus can make you depolarize and get up there because you're already there. Sending me mountain climbing brochures when I'm at the top of Mount Everest is not going to help me. It's like, brother, I'm at the top of Mount Everest. I'm refractory to any climbing brochures. I'm already there, okay? That's it. So the thing is, relative refractory period is when you come back down and you're in the process of repolarizing. And the relative refractory period is when you've come back down below your membrane potential, you're hyperpolarized, and you're in the process of sort of getting back to normal. It's like you're, fixing the tie, buttoning it in, trying to get your bra on the right way, don't put it on backwards. You're done, and you're not quite back to your normal self. And an extra stimulus that you weren't expecting might evoke a response, okay? But it is after you're already done with your action and you're coming back to your normal and getting all set to go back to the office. That's relative refractory period. So a greater than normal stimulus can make you get some action out of that. But it's not while you're in the depolarization. You ready? We can do it this way. Absolute refractory period is the process of depolarization and repolarization. Relative refractory period is when you're hyperpolarized, you're not back to normal, but you're already back down into where the inside of the cell is negative, and an extra big bang could get you to depolarize. The reason that these are very important periods is that if you deliver electrical shocks for a person who has a cardiac arrhythmia, and you deliver the electrical shock at the wrong time, like in the relative refractory period, you can make it worse. There are things worse than AFib, like VTAC. There are things worse than VTAC, like VFib. And there are things worse than VFib, like asystole. I used to be worried about how I couldn't dance until I saw a guy who had no legs, right? You know what I mean? There are worse things than AFib. No rhythm, flat line. Absolute refractory period, you've depolarized. Relative refractory period, you're in the process of repolarization, and a greater than normal stimulus can get you in action. Now, if we look at this next slide, we'll see relative and absolute refractory period, just done in a graphical way. And let's say the same thing in a graphical way to have it brought up. Now, the interior of the cell is normally negative at -70. Now, depolarization means that the cell from negative on the inside becomes positive on the inside. Okay. Polarized means negative in, positive out. Depolarized means the opposite. What is the major thing that results in the depolarization of cells? What makes this become positive on the inside? Is it a negative thing leaving? Is it chloride loss, chloride gain, calcium loss, potassium loss, sodium loss from inside the cell, sodium going into the cell? And that's how the questions can be phrased. Depolarization is basically based on sodium entering. Sodium is positive. The positive thing goes in, it depolarizes. Fine. Now, this point here where it stops depolarizing is when the sodium channels close. And when the sodium channels close, you stop depolarizing. When the sodium channels close, you stop depolarizing. When the sodium channels close, you stop depolarizing. The other thing is the repolarization. Normally the cell is negative inside and positive outside. Depolarization is the opposite. The interior becomes positive. Now, what makes the cell repolarize? Repolarize means go back to its normal. Is potassium leaves. Potassium leaves the cell. Potassium leaves the cell means that the positive thing leaves the interior of the cell, will become negative again. Now, the relative refractory period is this thing down here where it's called hyperpolarization. And hyperpolarization, this thing down here where it's hyperpolarization, and hyperpolarization means it goes too far, it becomes more negative than usual. The hyperpolarization is predominantly caused by, and again, the same choices. Sodium entering, sodium leaving. Chloride entering, chloride leaving. Calcium entering, calcium leaving. Hyperpolarization is because the potassium continues to leave. Let's go back to the previous slide. If we look at this previous slide, we'll see the conductance of potassium is a late thing. The conductance of sodium happens first. The conductance of potassium happens later. And remember, conductance of sodium goes into the cell. Conductance of potassium goes out of the cell. So what happens is that the conductance of potassium happens later, and that is why in hyperpolarization, the conductance of potassium leaving the cell, the positive thing leaving the cell makes the interior of the cell more negative. The positive thing leaving makes the interior more negative than usual. Next slide. Action potential. Okay, cool. Action potential. Now the main thing is that when something is propagating along is that a thin fiber has more or less ability to conduct than a thick fiber. Well, I don't know, it's like common sense, right? I mean, it's like saying, does a thin pipe have more or less ability to conduct water than a thick pipe? Does a wide pipe have more conductance than a narrow pipe? Well, a wide pipe has more conductance. That's kind of like saying, well, is this electrical wire here on my microphone, does that conduct more than, high tension power lines coming from your power station? Well, the point is, the wider the cable, the more it can conduct. The wider the cable, the more it can conduct. Now, myelination is insulation. It's basically saying, does something that is insulated have the ability to conduct more, the ability to conduct less? If you're insulated, you can conduct more. It is like common sense stuff that we change the words around. Myelin is insulation. If it's insulated, you lose less energy. That's why we have insulation. You see, the concept of understanding conductance and resistance, man, opposites. Well, we want the wire, the nerve, to have high conductance, which is the low resistance, and we want the insulation that's protecting it to have low conductance, because we don't want to lose the energy. So the more myelinated you are, is it more conductance or less conductance? More conductance, because it's insulation. Next, the size of the action potential. Well, a big stimulus will conduct much better and faster than a teeny stimulus. Well, it's like stimulus packages, you know what I mean? So a 50-cent stimulus package fix the economy more or less. Well, let's not get into that one. But the whole point is that a little stimulus has less of an effect than a big stimulus. Whether you agree with the effect or not, the size of the stimulus package changes the effect on the tissues. Now, you ready? 37-year-old woman presents with optic neuritis, blurry vision, and that optic neuritis resolves. The following year, she presents with motor weakness of her legs, which resolves, and then sensory weakness of her arms, which resolves. What is the mechanism? How does this happen? What is the mechanism of her problem? Which of the following is the cause, mechanism? Now, if this was a step 2 USMLE question, they'd say, can you recognize the diagnosis? Young female with multiple neurological problems over time and space, most commonly optic neuritis. And they'd ask you to recognize, and you say multiple sclerosis. The step 1 question is, what is the mechanism of this disease? So you have to recognize the diagnosis as multiple sclerosis and recognize the mechanism of the diagnosis, 2-step. To recognize the diagnosis and the mechanism. A 3rd step for step 1 is that you say, what is the mechanism of the therapy? The mechanism is loss of myelin, loss of neuron tissue, loss of conductance, loss of myelin, demyelinating disease. So if you demyelinate, you lose conductance. You demyelinate, you lose conductance. You demyelinate, you lose conductance. Glutathione, copolymer 1 is used to prevent progression. What is the mechanism? prevents demyelination. Myelin basic protein. It's myelin basic protein. Prevents demyelination. It's myelin basic protein. Ah.